All right, guys, welcome to the Parley, Real People, Real Talk. Special guest today, Tuhon Phillip Gelinas. So, how long have you been training martial arts now?
Well, I started in actually March of 1967.
Wow.
I actually wanted to do martial arts before that. Um, I lived in a place just outside of Montreal, a place called Como, which has been evolved into a place called Hudson. Hudson was the larger town that was nearby, so it kind of got amalgamated. And I used to live out there, and my first few years of training consisted of me leaving the high school I was going to, hitchhiking out to the 40, which would be the 401 in Quebec, and I would hitchhike into Montreal and train, and then take the train back to Montreal. There's a 10 o'clock train, or back from Montreal to where I lived, and that's what it was like until about '69 when I moved into Montreal. And I realized at that time that my teacher, who I was doing Japanese karate, a style called Chitoryu, which is one of the first styles in Canada. I think I was Shotokan. There was a guy named Ari Anastasiadis who started Shotokan in Montreal, but after that, I think Chitoryu was very big. Mr. Tsuroka in Toronto was the first guy who brought Shitoryu. He was the representative of Dr. Chitosi. And I didn't know much about that. So anyway, but my whole thing was just like, okay, I just wanted to train. I mean, I wanted to train with anybody who knew anything about any martial art. There was a guy who actually, my relatives, we lived in that area for a long time. So it was kind of like almost like a compound. There was relatives on either side of the road for like 100 yards either way. And so one time there were some people at my uncle's house, which used to be, he bought it from my grandparents, and they had a small little house, and some people who had some martial art experience, they were kendo practitioners. They were going to move in there, and I was so excited, and I didn't get to see them but that was it. And then in 1967, my teacher from my Chitoryu teacher, Mr. Tranquang Ba, came out and did a seminar or did a demonstration at this place called the St. Thomas Aquinas School, which had been turned into a bit of a YMCA type place. And he, so at the end of that, I said, okay, I want to do this. And they supposedly, there were some of the advanced kids there, they weren't very advanced, but, compared to nothing, anything is higher than nothing, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so I was training that way, and then it fell apart after a few days or a few weeks. And then so there was a guy who was there who was actually going to Tranquang Ba school, and he said he would drive me in. And so I would go in and literally, I think he was there for about a month or so. And, he drove in religiously twice a week, and I would get a ride, and it was great. I would get a ride in, I would get a ride out. And but what happened is that he stopped. I've noticed. You'll realize this as a martial arts practitioner over years. People come, they say the best stuff, and they leave after 2 days, right? So and sometimes not even that long. So I was, I wanted to come in, so I wanted to learn that stuff. So I did this stuff. I trained all year. Once he stopped doing it, I started hitchhiking into Montreal. So from where I was, there was a main road, which was like basically a country road. And I would get on there and hitchhike to the Highway 70 or the Highway 40, which is the main highway between Montreal and Ottawa, or actually it also
Wow.
branches off and becomes that. And I would hitchhike into Montreal that way.
How long would that take? How long would that take, Tuhon?
Well, I would get out of school around 3, and the class was at 6. So I guess it would sometimes, sometimes I would be lucky because I got some really weird rides. And I once got in the car with this guy who I'm sure he was just, I don't say he was escaped from a penitentiary, but he definitely smelled like a penitentiary. And so,
Oh shit.
and he was like this, holding his car and driving like this, and it's like, and you just sort of say to yourself, okay, I could get out here and I could sit at the side of the road for the next 4 hours and not get anything, or I could put up with this nonsense, get in there, as soon as you get to the outside of Montreal, as soon as you get to where it kind of, imagine if you were at the corner of let's say Don Valley and the 401, it would be, you were starting to have some connection to
Yeah.
the city bus system, and so you could get in there, and so that's what I did. And before I kind of knew a little bit about it. When in the early '60s, I'd gone to school in Montreal for a couple of years, and so I kind of knew how the buses worked. So it wasn't like I was sitting there like, oh my God, what's going to happen to me? But it wasn't spectacular. It was on, if anybody knows Montreal, it was on Côte-de-Neige Road, right in the middle of Côte-de-Neige, sort of like next to the right kitty corner across from the recently opened, at that time anyway, Plaza Côte-de-Neige. And we did, I was there for, I guess, from 67 to 69. And then we moved, the school moved to a basement of a church, because my teacher was a sensei in Japanese karate, but he was also a professor of political science at the University of Montreal, which is a French university. So, so I would have, I would get whatever training. And then I met Mr. Tsuroka once. He came down and did a seminar for our school, and it was great. But you start realizing that there are other things. And so in 1969, my teacher basically left Montreal without telling me, mind you, not like I was on his radar or anything. And so I went, I showed up one day and he wasn't there, and there was no class, and I kind of went, okay. So at that time, the CJEP system in Montreal was just opening up, and I went down there and I bumped into a guy, or I met a guy by the name of Constantine Darling, or named Connie Darling. And he was a guy who had come in from the United States as a draft dodger. He, there was a lot of that in those days. A lot of really well-known people, Americans, came and moved to Montreal or moved to Canada, and this was one of them. He was from New York City. He was a big, muscular guy of mixed heritage, and he had such, he had huge muscles, and yet he could do splits because he was also a dancer. He was.
Oh wow, that's a great combination.
Yeah, well, it was he made me aware of my body much more so than anybody else had ever had done at that point. Because most of the time you just sort of sit there and you walk up and down there and you do katas and you do techniques, and it's sort of like, I'm going to pretend to block here and I'm going to pretend to punch your face. Now that's not against anybody doing karate, but that's just the way it was for us. And so he would do his stuff, and so it was kind of weird because he was really good at what he did as a dancer, and he was a principal dancer in a lot of, there's a group called Ballet Jazz Contemporain in Montreal, and he was one of the lead dancers for that. And we would see him sometimes. He would do stuff, and I was with him till like 1973. And 1973, on my 21st birthday, I kind of said, okay, it's time for me to take this seriously. So I quit that school, and I moved to the local Kajukenbo school, which I heard about that. I went to school. I went to a place called Westmount High School in 1970, 69, 70. And one of the guys in there, Mr. Shane Malloy, had heard about the school. He'd gone to that school, and he took me. I wasn't like Mr. Karate, but I mean, at the same time, when people ask you these questions, people say, you don't think that you did talk about, who knows, right? Because it's like a long time ago.
Yeah.
And so you realize that, oh, okay. So, but anyway, he told me that he was training in this style, Kajukenbo, and it was interesting. And I'd read about it. I was one of those guys that in 1965, my father bought me the first time I ever received Black Belt magazine. I memorized this thing cover to cover.
Wow.
I remember the ads in it. I remember the stuff in it. It was like, if I was looking at it, I could probably tell you exactly what's on the next page.
You still have those magazines?
No, are you kidding? I have moved. People never see. Like, I've won a bunch of trophies in my time in doing martial arts tournaments. I don't have any of that stuff. I have one or two, but mostly because they were, sometimes I was lucky enough to win one or two that actually were made out of something that you'd want to be able to melt down and sell, or they told me that it was, and it probably wasn't. But most of the time, with the tournaments before I started doing it, they were all made out of plastic, and so you would basically melt. They would melt, and they were, there are times when I would win a tournament in the United States, and I would have it in the car. It would literally be sitting in the back of the car. And by the time I got home, it had fallen apart.
No.
Oh yeah. It was,
Oh my God.
yeah. But tournament trophies are basically, they're kind of, they're not much different from participation trophies now, but as far as quality is concerned. But it's like you get what you expect. And it's like, and it's funny because I always had this idea that that if I had this thing, if people knew who I was, that
Yeah.
it would be different. And of course, nobody cared.
Nobody
And,
cares.
and so I started doing that, and so I did that from about 1973. I had my black belt from this guy Connie Darling, in 1973. When I showed up at the Kajikebo school, they all told me, "Well, we don't recognize your black belt."
Okay.
The reality is, it doesn't matter, because if somebody thinks you suck and you suck, well, that's true. It doesn't matter what rank you have. And if somebody thinks you suck and you don't suck, it also doesn't matter, because what's the rank? What is a rank? A rank is just somebody's arbitrary decision that you meet a very, very limited set of standards. I mean, for example, I was, I had a partner some years ago, and he would tell me like, he would tell me that he was a writer for a local magazine, and there was something called Fighting Arts, Oriental Fighting Arts, and he had a couple of articles, one on my Kajikebo instructor, because he was also an instructor under him, and he'd also had met Ben Largusa of the Largusa Cali system, and he'd met Villabreil and all that kind of stuff, and he talked about Guru Dan and all that kind of stuff. And this was before Guru Dan had actually started going out on the road, and so I was like, oh yeah, and then I was really impressed with the guy, because that this is like all these people I'd heard about, and then later on I found out that like, they didn't know who he was. They just had no clue. Is that you or me?
Nah, I don't know. I'm trying to shut it off so nobody hears it.
Okay, well, I'm going to turn it off too. So, okay, there, boof.
So you heard about these people through this Kaju Kempo circle of people?
Well, I heard about my instructor. Basically, he was also one of those guys who left. He had been in the, I guess, the Coast Guard in the States. There's the story where I heard he was in the Coast Guard in the United States, and he was a very effeminate-looking Filipino guy. He weighed like 120 pounds, but he was deadly. There's a, I don't know, in Toronto, there's probably a place where people go and drink too much and try and hang out and pick up chicks and stuff like that. Well,
Yeah.
There's a place in Montreal called Crescent Street, and that's kind of like the Anglo version of it.
Okay.
And so he would hang out there all the time, and so there would be there'd be lots and lots and lots of people who were willing to test it. And he would go out, and when I first met him, he had his martial arts school was underwritten. The cost of it was underwritten by one of the local biker gangs, because they figured this is our what is it called, our enforcer or something like that. I mean, not that they couldn't handle it themselves, but they were. It was just kind of weird, and so. But I was told that I was no good in my martial. Like, we don't recognize a black belt, and I got my. I was the. Even though that may have been true in their eyes, it took me a year and a half after that to get my black belt from them. And,
Oh wow, so that was pretty quick.
So
how did you initially deal with that kind of? Some people would take that as an insult. Some people would take that as motivation. With all your experience, what would you say the best way to take that kind of criticism is?
In stride, because if it's true, there's not much you can do about it. And if it's not true, there's also not much you can do about it. You can't, like, for example, if somebody says to you, I don't think you're any good, Mark, and you beat the crap out of them, which I didn't do that with the guys at the school, but if that was the thing, it's like, my whole idea is like, look, I'm here to train. I'm not here to make you like me or make you hate me. I mean, it's also nice. It's nicer when people like you, but it's not
necessary.
It's not necessary. I was so busy trying to learn martial arts that the idea of somehow being matching their perception of what they thought a martial artist should be was like, yeah, whatever. And he also did something called White Crane. He did a form of
Yes.
White Crane called Hopgar. Hopgar means, Hopgar translated means the hop family. His teacher named Harry Nanming, he was his teacher in San Francisco when he was there. And he actually got shot by some members of some young kids of a rival Tong. So just goes to show you there's like, you may have all this martial arts skill, but
Yeah.
you can stop a
Always
bullet. You can stop a bullet, but whatever. But then in '81, I had read an interview, not interview, but I read there was there's a magazine article in Official Karate Magazine, which I will state is probably the worst edited and assembled magazine ever known to humankind. Because I mean, like this,
Tell me what you really think.
What's that?
Tell me what you really think.
Yeah, exactly. But no, this was it would be horrible. I would have these things, and they would be really lousy photographs, and totally, they would put for example, if you bought a magazine, or if they were putting together a magazine, they would have the whole thing set, and then they would take out bits and pieces of the article because they had managed to sell an ad that would fit in that place, and so that's what they would do, because they were. It wasn't so much they were into money, but they just, when you're living hand to mouth, you don't say no. it's like okay, they're giving me money. Oh right, that's what I wouldn't do. Anyway, so. But he was a Hopgar teacher, so he taught us these things. I kind of took to it like a duck to water, or at least I thought I did. And after a little while, after I've been there, like I started in November. Actually, it was my birthday, so it was November 26th, 1973. And within 6 months, I was a brown belt with them, and then another year I got a black belt. So yeah, but I mean, like when I would say it was a brown belt, I did every class they had. And I trained on my own every whatever I could. I didn't, and I'd also had been training since 1967 to 1973. So it wasn't like I was not used to kicking and punching.
Now, sorry to interrupt, but now that being said, because that's that's quite an achievement. You go from different art to art and are able to excel really well. But you said something that most people don't do, like, going to a class 3 times a week and, then kind of being casual with it. That's one thing. But I mean, you were doing every class, you were training at home. What was the drive for you? Did you plan to be a fighter? Did you plan to envision yourself having your own school? What was that passion that kept you that dedicated?
I probably thought it just because I was probably the most. I would look in the mirror and I go, "God, you're so useless. You got to train harder." And so that's kind of like, that's really what my motivation was. I just didn't think I was very good. I didn't. My perception of myself was like, sort of. I was like that, like going, So, and so my idea was that this is what you do. You just, if you're interested in something, you trained. And a lot of my friends have said, you might have autism, you should be checked, or you might, you have ADHD, you should be checked. I have no clue. I have never been checked. So maybe it's true, maybe it's not true.
That's all bullshit, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying. All I'm saying is that these are possibilities. These are options. But you'd read. I mean, I remember, with Connie Darlingsville, there was a guy in Montreal. I'll out him. His name is Vince DiPaolo, and he was claiming to have been, after the death of Bruce Lee in 1973. He was advertising, because of course Bruce Lee wasn't going to show up at your door after he died. So he was advertising that he and his students were direct descendants of the Jeet Kune Do group. And of course we all went up to his school, like myself and my 4 buddies from that group, and we all looked and said, "This isn't Bruce Lee's style." And so he had a karate suit on, and like he had a homemade karate suit. It wasn't even like a commercial karate suit. And well, no, but that's more like his mother actually, who made it for him, was probably really good at but it was like,
yeah, but
imagine a pants that looked more like a kilt, because it was like very, really open and kind of a lot of pleats. Anyway, so this is what, but this is kind of the guy he did, and so you just realize after a while. And so actually around that same time, I started working with some bands on the road. And so after I got my black belt in Kajikembo in 1975, a guy that I was working with, there was a band called Mahogany Rush, which the lead guitarist is a guy named Frank Marino, and I had, where I was growing when I went, it's 1969, when we moved into Montreal. This place was called 4424. It was a youth center. It was like 6 or 7 blocks away from my house, and it was kind of a place to go and hang out. There was a rich guy that bought this place and kind of gave it to the kids. It was kind of like, yeah, thanks. Like we're really disappointed. We're really, we were really put upon, and so this is the kind of stuff that we would run into, and so we they had some guys there that were running programs, but in the basement my friend Norman Perry had put together a there was like, basically it was like 2 sides of a basement, and he made this as a a rehearsal studio, and so a lot of guys started rehearsing there, and Frank Marino and Mahogany Rush group started rehearsing there, and they and I got to know them a bit, and then they asked me to go on the road, so I started going on the road. And the first show we did, we were opening up a really big thing at the Cleveland Indians Stadium with Rod Stewart headlining. So it was like, yeah, we were like 85th on the bill, but it was interesting. So, but I met a lot of people that way, and so in 1981, I'd been married. I got married in 79, and so I had a daughter, and I had run into that magazine, that official karate magazine about Grand Tuhon Phillip Gelinas, and so I in there they had a small what's called a classified ad saying, for information, Arnis America organization, for information, send $2 to this address. So I sent $2, and I got back some photocopies of that magazine article. And this was in the days where they were 10 cents each. They were like 5 cents each. Wow. So that it's like really not that expensive. And then I said, and then of course the other thing, like you can get a T-shirt from the Arnis America organization. Just send $10. And it was like, yeah, well, I don't think I'll do that. But in part of this package of information, they indicated that Leo Gahe was teaching a seminar in Oneonta, New York, which is about halfway between Albany and Binghamton. Now, near my house, the train station, there was a train station, and I got on that train and took a train down to down to the United States. It was what they call the Adirondack. So I went between Montreal and New York City every day. Mm-hmm. And I took the train down to Albany. I took a bus into Oneonta. I was met, and then that weekend I had my very first weekend of training with Leo Gahe, and it was pretty awesome. I mean, the guy, I met most of the senior guys, like Tom Bizio was there, Billy McGrath was there, A.K. Baraka was there, Mike Franciotti was there. There were a lot of wow. whoever the seniors were there, they were all there. And, so it's kind of funny now because, this was in the days, so like, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happened that kind of evolved, but it was just very funny when people would say, well, it wasn't like that, in the old days. And you go, look, you weren't there. I would have met you.
What was his, what did you find his teaching style to be like compared to what you've previously had when you met him?
Well, my Kajikembo teacher was as I said before, he was a Filipino guy. So there's an awful lot of things. I mean, Filipino martial arts is kind of weird because it resembles an awful lot of stuff. In fact, I even see that on there's on parts of YouTube. There's a guy who kind of insinuates that maybe Kali was the mother art of karate. I have no idea how valid that is, but so the fact that he would say that is possible. And he said, because these are the arts, the techniques that underlie Kali are the same ones that are taught in all those ancient dojos in Okinawa, where karate was first created. I have no idea how true that is. I've been to Okinawa once, but I spent hanging out. I have a student who lives there, and he put me up for a couple of days. And we never, the only karate school I ever saw was the one that was kind of like when you look out his balcony, there's this place, and he would have the karate school was there, and it was great. But when we went and looked, I went downstairs. I want to see this. We went down and looked, and these kids were doing like jumping kicks on kicking pads, and they had purple belts, and they had like a rainbow series. It wasn't like you imagine these things in Okinawa. These guys are really serious, and they're sitting in like they're on their knees, hardwood floor. No, none of that kind of stuff. It was a kids class, and the guy had they came up and did a jumping kick, and it didn't matter what kind of jumping kick. They weren't doing anything really great. They were just like kids playing, and it was so it made you realize that sure, there are people out there who do this stuff, but it's like this: if you go into the American military, don't expect to meet the Navy SEALs at every corner of your life, right? Or or the Delta Force. These are guys, they got like 3 million people in these groups, or they got 3 million fighters in the American Army, and maybe 1,000 of them are of that ilk that is that level, and we have some of them in the Canadian forces, but you rarely ever see the real tip of the spear in great quantities, because why would you? And
Right.
so in fact, the last thing you want to do is walk down the street and go, oh, that's a Navy SEAL. Oh yeah, that's a Navy SEAL, or that's a member of JTF2, or that's a member of the SAS. You want to, these guys, their whole thing is you would never know who they were until they came up to you and told you, but would never tell you, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the thing. And so I was very fortunate that I spent the summer doing that, and then I was continuing my Kajukenbo training. And about 1980, well, actually in 1980, my Kajukenbo teacher actually retired. He closed what they say, they closed his hands, so he stopped teaching, and so I was teaching at one of the places, and this other guy, my senior in the school, a guy named Roy Buchanan, was teaching in another place, and so that's how we evolved. And I became a partner with that guy that I mentioned before, that guy who had written some articles, and that didn't turn out well. And so eventually, I started doing stuff, and I guess in late 1981, I entered a tournament at the at the United Nations High School in New York City, and I managed to finish in the top three. I say to finish in the top three because we didn't really see. The funny thing about cultural events like the ones that are done in the Filipino martial arts is that it's not really like a cultural event. Is not like it's you suddenly have to okay, this is a martial arts thing. Say yeah, it is, but it's also people singing, choral groups, and it's some fashion shows. And so what happened is that we got to the end. We had 3 people left, myself and these 2 other people, and we were told that we weren't going to be fighting for first, second, and third because they had 3 more fashion shows and some choral groups that had to do it, and they would get very upset if they didn't sing and do their fashion show. So I was given 3rd place because I was the newest person. This guy's girlfriend was there, and she got 2nd place, and this other guy who had the highest rank got 1st place. There was absolutely no there was no rhyme or reason. I'm not going to say, well, I would have kicked his ass or their ass or her ass or his ass, because it's like it's incidental. But the reality is, it made you realize that okay, that's like
That's
things aren't always equitable. You do what you do, and so I did that, and then I got involved because he stopped training. I got involved with some guys in California, the people I was that I was doing in Cali with in New York City got involved in Kajukenbo. So together we did a bit of cross training. So I would go in and meet them different places. I go down to New York sometimes, and they would come up here. In the meantime, Grand Tuhon Gahi had moved to Big Spring, Texas, and then the following year he moved to Albuquerque, and then he moved to Nashville. And so by the time he moved to Nashville, I was like 1988, and At that same time, I'd become friends with Mark Denny and Arlen Sanford and Eric Knaus of the Dog Brothers, and they had invited me. Uh, I'd been down to New York, or I'd been down to Los Angeles a few times. A very good friend of mine that I developed over the time, named Robert Reich, he had been doing stuff, but he was also a student at the Inosanto Academy. So I'd met Guru Inosanto at that tournament I talked about, and because he was the chief, he was the chief referee, and so he came down. This is I think
Wow.
he started doing seminars in about 1985, because what happened is that he had so many in the years after Bruce Lee's death, he had so many people calling him up asking him if he would do seminars. He finally went to one of his people, the people, because he was a teacher of history and physical education
Mm.
in I think in one of the I don't want to say, I think he was in what's it called, Pacific Palisades, so I'm not sure. Anyway, so he went to one of his guys and said, look, I'm getting all these requests to do seminars, and he said, okay, well, tell you what you should do. You should you go there and do it. Well, when you come back, we'll get you in. The guy didn't really do that. The guy kind of screwed up and he quit. He had something happened to him and he quit. And so when Guru Dan decided after his year or so was up that he didn't want, he'd met all of his obligations, these people. And so what happened is that he went back and they said, he looked, and basically he could get back on the teaching roles, but he wouldn't be able to, the guys his friend there hadn't actually maintained his seniority. He had just basically screwed it up as far as
Wow.
I mean, yeah, well, this is what I heard. So I mean, and in the post thing, it's kind of what happened. And so, okay, so he evolved. And so that kind of, that made him, want to do it. And he started doing, training and teaching more. But in the last little while, I mean, he's out there literally 50 weeks or out of
Yeah,
52.
it's crazy. Yeah, it's amazing.
But the thing is, but he's gone from, like, at the beginning, he was kind of like, I guess there was he was, I guess he felt that he was going to rip people off if he charged them too much money. And so there was I remember hearing some stories that, some people were so greedy that they would pay for his ticket and all the other stuff just from the sticks they would sell at the seminar. Never mind the costs of bringing him in. So it was like, there was a whole lot of kind of stuff like that. But
Wow.
but it's, we would not have seen him at all had this not happened, because he was more than happy to become a teacher. And he's now, 84, so 20 years ago, which is I guess 2021 or whatever it was, he would have retired and just gone off to wherever he was, and had a little life on the side. And as a result of him being an instructor, he's developed a massive following all over the world. And it's it's kind of funny because he, when his book, Filipino Martial Arts, was the first book I ever bought, because it was actually the first book that was actually accessible to anybody. But I would read books, and you read stuff, and you really wouldn't get anything out of it, because you kind of had to know the material before you
Yeah.
could understand the material. It's kind of like somebody saying, well, you do a paksao. Like, what?
What the hell's a back?
I slap your hand and then I punch you. And I go, no, that's not it. But yeah, it's sort of it. But it's like, well, you hit him and then you punch him. Well, yeah, but so unless you have a frame of reference, even unless you've got context, there's no context. So I bought that, and so when I started training with him, or tried training with Guru Dan Tuhon, it was like, okay, yeah. But I was training. I was so, I traveled all this way. I mean, it took me like half a day or a full day. I would get on the train at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I would get off the bus in Oneonta at like 6 or 7 at night. So it was like a 10-hour trip of whatever. I would take the train and the bus and a taxi to get from the airport. Actually, a very funny thing, I took a train to Albany, and then I took a taxi from there to the bus station, which just happened to be across the street from the train station I just passed through before I got to Albany. So I did. It was like a $20 train station or a $20 ticket to come back to where it was. It was like, yeah, okay. You live and learn, right? Anyway, so but it was quite amazing because I'd never seen this. I bought a pair of sticks. In those days, a pair of sticks was $5, but they weren't really well made. But it was like, yeah, okay, whatever. And by the end of that weekend, I could hardly walk because we had Eddie Jaffrey teaching us Silat.
Oh,
And he was doing squat kicks and whatever. Like, this is a guy who would stand on the counter 4 feet off the table, where we were, and he would jump and then land on his knees on this flagstone type of deck thing. And this is what he would do because this is what his teacher had demanded of him when he was training in in Indonesia. And so these guys were like, so I by the end of the weekend, like Sunday morning, I had no more glycogen left in my muscles. I couldn't walk up the stairs, because if you lift your foot up upstairs and then you need to
put your weight.
put your weight on it and then flex it to stand up. So there was another way where we were imagine the cabin was here, and then where we stayed was kind of like, there's a floor. We stayed in the basement on mats, and there was a floor above it. And so what we do is we would go out the door on that floor, and then we would sort of like walk up this angled, slow, thing to the ground floor. And we looked like we were like Night of the Living Dead because it was like, and it's kind of funny. I saw a really funny meme the other day. What really sucks about the Night of the Living Dead, or what sucks about being a zombie? All that walking. And so basically, but this is kind of what we were doing. It's like I had the skin on my hands was ripped off. I didn't know how to hold a stick. So because I'd never held a stick before, I bought a broomstick and I cut it in half and I put some electrical tape on it to spiral it, because in my mind that's the same thing, right? Rattan, it's like it's made out of rattan. What's rattan? I don't know. And then you sort of you look at the wood of those bent wood chairs and you go, nah, this can't be it. So I would buy these sticks and you hold them in a certain way, but of course you don't know how to do that. So you'd hold them. And so the first part would be this part, because this is where the stick would be like rubbing back and forth. And so that would start to blister up, and then you'd loosen up and do there. And so it would be here. And then the pads on all of your fingers would go. And of course, this was happening in both hands simultaneously. So you're going like this and somebody's telling you to do stuff. And of course, you're trying really hard because you don't want to sit there and go, okay, I paid all this money to be here.
Yeah, exactly.
And I have this opportunity to train. And I remember let's hurry back to the time when I was doing the Japanese karate stuff. I thought that if I felt like Linus in the pumpkin patch on Peanuts, if I was really sincere, if I trained really hard, they would recognize me and they would bring me out. It's just that stuff that you look now and you go, my God, how stupid could I have been? But at that time, like when you're like 14 or 15 years old, this is what you actually believe that the difference between a guy who does really, really well in physical activity and a guy who doesn't is probably just the fact that they haven't had their dreams broken. So I never told anybody. I said, he's going to come to me because I look really, really, really interested. But you hope that, and later you realize it's not true. But it's what motivates you to begin with. Anyway, so I was there and I was working really hard, doing the stuff, and my muscles were hurting, and I could, we were squat kicking up and down, and we were doing sweeps. And at the end of that weekend, it was like I couldn't believe how much pain I was in. And I got to the train station off, and we were on the platform of the train, or at the bottom stair of the train. I had about an 18-inch drop. You get down from this. So you never smash into a platform. They always have the stairs of the train higher up. Yeah. And I did, I knew that if I fell forward, I'd probably fall backwards into the train. So I took a walk, and I kind of, it was one of those things where you go, okay, I'm going to try it. And I jumped and I landed, and I kind of like teetered a bit, And my wife was going, "Oh my God, what's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong?" And I sort of said, I sort of held on to the cart. My daughter was in her little walker, and I sort of held on to it. And I went, "It was great. I want to go back." And so that's the reality, that you're motivated by what you're motivated by. In fact, I feel most people who have easier time of it, getting driven to the martial arts school by their parents and stuff like
Yeah.
that. They never get they don't understand why it doesn't work, and they say, well, it doesn't work because you're not hungry enough.
Exactly. They're not doing it because they want to do it. They're doing it because mom and dad are taking them.
Yeah. So it's I don't want to say, well, none of kids say, look, I remember going to I remember going to a tournament where the biggest division was the under 12 black belt division, and I knew that time we were all going to hell.
And what was it? What was the competition like compared in your perspective back then in those days? What was the competition like? What was the vibe or energy like within the competition compared to say now? How has it evolved?
Well, now things are much more political. Like if, for example, you go to there are different groups. It used to be there were about 5 or 6 really big open tournaments, and if you went in and won one of those tournaments, you'd automatically get like up, and there used to Black Belt magazine or Karate Illustrated magazine used to have these regional ratings, and so they have 10 regions in the United States, and another region would be Canada, and another region would be here, and so they would have all these regions, and like it would be like these guys thought that these being rated in these regions was something special. So there was one region that had Vermont in it, and I went down to Rutland, Vermont, to compete in a tournament, and they never heard of us, they never knew us. We were, but they thought their poop didn't stink, is what you'd say nowadays, and so these guys thought they were awesome. And this one guy, their teacher, would come in the ring, and every time any one of his guys would get a point, he'd walk into the middle of the ring and go, "Hey, that's not a point." And if my guy was on the other side, I said, "Yes, it was. There was a point." And he'd be like, "Oh, yeah," because sometimes a lot of guys who are, if you've ever been to a karate tournament,
Yeah.
you realize that the guys who are the judging are the guys who never fight mostly.
Yeah.
And so if they never fight, they're kind of like easily intimidated. Like, what are you stopping? How do you know who I think I am? So that whole thing. So anyway, I was fighting this one guy who was a rated fighter in that division, in his thing. And so, and basically what he did is he came into the ring that we were all standing around waiting for the selection, and he said, "I want to fight him," pointing at me. So, okay, sure, great. But the difference is, if you in the United States, there's this whole like braggadocio thing. So you go into a tournament, or at least in those days it was, and it'll be like, you go into the tournament and you go, "Yeah, I'm gonna kill him. I'm gonna kill him." It's like, and so to me, that it's nice and everything, but my feeling is that in my school we probably fought harder people, like that guy, the senior guy in our school, Roy Buchanan. He'd won so many tournaments all across, in our area. There's a tournament he won he actually won the 1979 All-American Open, but they kind of ripped him off because it was a Korean tournament, and he won. It was one all, and he scored the guy, and then 3 referees said, "I get him a point," and the center referee said, "I have 2 votes, no point," and his guy in the corner, so that's 3-3, and so. But I know that he scored that point. But this is a guy who won like tournaments. He won all sorts of tournaments, and he did really well. And so this is a guy that I did well against in the school all the time. So this guy, who will remain nameless, but this guy was just basically walking around going like, "Yeah, he doesn't know who I think I am," that kind of nonsense. And we'd be like, "Let's find out. Let's find out." And I hit him so many times. I think he was getting PTSD or something like that. It was like, it was just like. And the thing is, the funniest thing is that they were allowing us to do kicks to the groin. They never, East.
What?
That's a very West Coast thing that you allow. I mean, in California, you're allowed doing kicks to the groin, but you're not allowed doing kicks in the East Coast. But the guy, the referee, I don't know, the guy who put the thing said, "Yep." And so my whole thing was, okay, bam, 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 and there's a kick in Kajikembo that we slip, we fake a side kick, and then you just let your rear leg go underneath you, so you kind of like slide into first base, and then as the person throws his kick to counter you, he leaves his groin open, and so you kick him. And so I kicked him as hard as I could.
Oh shit!
Hey man, it sucks to be him. What can I say?
I love it. I fucking love it. So tell me about now. Okay, so let's back it up to when you meet Mark Denny.
Okay.
Now you've been competing and stuff like that. How different was that? Because you guys are. I'm telling you, you guys did something that I don't think at this time was really seen. It was different, and I'm sure it kind of rubbed some of the traditional FMA guys the wrong way.
Sort of.
Guys, what was that like? How did it go? Because it's very exciting to be part of a group of guys who are willing to say, let's just try shit and experiment. I'm lucky to have that. What was it like?
Okay. At the beginning, so I was very lucky because I was there, I guess. I met Mark, it's 85, 86. And then Eric I knew because he was from New York City. So I knew him before he left. And Arlen, I didn't meet until I think when the first event, the first thing in Los Robles Park in San Clemente area. Anyway, so I was there, and it was kind of like in Ketchikambo, we were, it wasn't like, in our school, it wasn't like you would do these things and spar. I would go like, I touched you, and I got a point. If you didn't nail the guy in the body, I mean, like you would. It wasn't like you were allowed to knock his teeth out or anything like that, but it was like control to the head, but absolutely no control at all to the body. And like if you could kick the guy into next week, go for it. So in a sense, we in the Dog Brothers thing, when I first started doing some Dog Brothers stuff, Eric Knaus had made some things that looked like fencing helmets, but they were made out of stainless steel mesh. So he had taken pads, and so he was eventually dissatisfied with them because you could have taken a baseball bat to somebody's head and it wouldn't have really hurt them. So he kind of they went and they said, okay, they took those, put them away, and then started coming out with the fencing headgear. And the thing is, like, the real problem is most people have with that stuff, I find, is the fact that it's not that they're chicken shit. It's just that they don't know for sure what the deal is. Because they literally, a lot of times people would be there and they'd say, okay, well, we're really tough guys, right? And so, but I remember there were some people, some videos going out in the post Talk Brothers thing, and there were all these guys going, yeah, we don't wear helmets. Yeah, but you don't hit for the head either, so who cares? So it's kind of like saying we don't use knives. That's right, neither do we. Yeah, but we don't use tanks either. Yeah, well, I don't even know how to drive a tank, so okay, I wouldn't. It's just like
it makes sense.
I think it's like, but the thing is, what we did is we said, look, you have to both agree on the kind of weapon you're going to use. It cannot be it cannot be a straw on steroids. It has to be a real weapon. And when you do it, when you actually attack the person, there has to be some consequence. You can't just sort of go tap you, I hate you. You're physically trying to stop the person from doing whatever they want to you. So Mark, actually I think there's a thing where Mark was fighting a guy, or not Mark was fighting a guy, but Eric was fighting a guy, and and there's this whole thing where he does this tall, because I think he's like 6 inches or at least 6 inches taller than me. I think I have a picture of me standing next to him, and I don't come up to his shoulders, so it was like it made me like, oh my god, that must have been difficult for me. It's like, well, but so, and he'd do this thing where he would do a backhand. And I was fighting once at the academy. They used to have a group called the After Wednesday or the Wednesday night training group, or the After Wednesday group, after Wednesday night training. I don't know, whatever it is. And so I fought him doing some espada daga, and he hit me across the knee, and I literally blacked out because I mean, I got there. It didn't cause me pain, but it just shut down my ability of my body to do it. It was like I just went, you know. So it was like, you know, I saw myself on videotape later on, going like, oh, that's what happened. Okay, but you know, it was funny because at the same time, because I had done some kind of training, some, you know, I was used to hitting people. I wasn't like used to going through like I'm gonna almost touch you and you're gonna be almost really upset. It's like, no, it's like I'm gonna hit you as hard as I can, and if you can hit me back as hard as you can, that's fabulous. But you know, it won't be just a one-way thing. So it wasn't like, and you weren't just standing there, you know, like there's some groups, some Filipino groups in the Philippines that, you know, they say, oh, you do full contact. No, you don't. You stand there and you would tick with with large pencils. It's
Oh
not the
my
same
God,
thing,
I love
you know. And the thing, you know, and the irony, of course, you know, when people say, well, you know, we're just like the Dog Brothers, and you go like, well, yes, you are, in that you're both practicing Cali and you both do this thing, but until, you know, there's a reality that if you don't express yourself in a way that's combat oriented, you know,
it. Yeah,
like there's a, you know, it's
it's not real.
well, yeah, it's not real. It's like, I mean, that one of the big things that Bruce Lee did, you know, at the beginning, everything, like, I know that he wore a lot of equipment at the beginning, like he wore catcher's mix, you know, catcher's stuff and catcher's face masks and all that kind of stuff. And it took him a while, but he started actually divesting himself more and more and more of that stuff, because he started realizing that having that protection is actually more of an impediment than it is a protection. It actually it doesn't give you the sign of, you know, the same kind of stuff. So they started. There was actually Eric Knaus, when he got to California, I guess was 83 or 84. He met a guy named not met, but he was introduced to a guy named Dr. David Wink, who was actually the student of one of the guys that I first started doing. The guy who sponsored the seminar, a guy named Bujin Mateen. Anyway, so this guy was a PhD in physics, and he moved to California, and he was a really big guy. He was way over 6 feet. I don't want to say how much over 6 feet, not because I'm afraid of him, but because I just don't remember. And you know, like some people, when you say they're 6'2" and they're 6'4", they go, "Hey, he doesn't know me." So it's like,
Yeah.
I don't. He's way over 6. He's much taller than I ever will be, and he's over 6'2". And so, anyway, so this is actually where they, you know, Guru Dan, actually, Tuhon guy showed up and said, "Okay, Eric, we're going out. There's somebody who wants to spar with you," and that was the guy David Wink. And so they sparred together, and they fought together a bunch of times, and they started coming up with the basic tenets of Dog Brother stuff there. Eric was at that time was a you know, the whole Dog Brother thing came about because Eric was approached by a guy who, I don't know if you remember Panther Productions, but they used to do all
Yes.
sorts of, okay. So
Hunak did some stuff
yeah,
on that.
right, exactly. But and the guy whose name I almost remembered, but I can't remember. Joe Jennings is the guy who ran Panther Productions. Anyway, he asked if Eric Knaus would be interested because he had won one or two of the West Coast Eskrima Society tournaments up in San Jose. But when he wasn't dressed like a guy who would, you know, strangle your grandmother type of thing, he looked like he was a guy who, you know, he wore glasses, you know, blondish hair, short sleeve dress shirt, tie, you know, pocket protector and things like that. And so he walked in. Actually, they asked him once if he wanted to bring in. So he didn't have a way to get the trophy home. So they took it home for him, and it was waiting at the academy, at the Nasano Academy. And so he walked in and said, you know, and of course everybody was looking at him going, "Oh my God, it's a geek." And so they were going, "Yeah, what can we do for you?" So well, I'm here to pick something up. "Yeah, what?" And it's that over there. And the guy said, "Yeah, that, you know, that's owned by Eric Knaus, and said, yeah, that's me. And I was like, oh, it was just very funny because, it's like,
We're expecting that.
well, there's a whole lot of, there. I mean, as cool a guy as Guru Inosanto is, there's a certain amount in those days. There was a certain amount of expectation on a lot of people's mind. They felt that people had to meet their image of what someone should do like or should look like, not just be, not they couldn't just be good. They had to look like they could be good. So there, so anyway, Eric sort of got his trophy, and then later on, Joe Jennings asked him if he'd do it, and then Mark Denny was a friend and confidant of Eric at that time, and said, "Look, instead of doing it, instead of making it an Eric Knaus thing, let's make it a Dog Brothers thing, so that Dog Brothers, this will last longer than Eric Knaus, because Eric Knaus, like for example, Eric Knaus is now." Has moved to Houston, and he doesn't really do fighting anymore, but the Dog Brothers continue. So in that way, it was a smart move, and that, excuse me, it wasn't like, okay, we're trying to replace Mark or we're trying to replace Eric. So no, but it's like you want something to make him be sensible. And so the very first week we did in Los Ramblas Park in I guess it was, I'm saying San Clemente, but it was, when you look at the map, it's not San Clemente, it's like right next door to it. But anyway, so maybe San Luis Obispo, I'm not sure. I go there and I'm not the best. I'm not the best tourist. I don't remember a lot of these things. Anyway, so we went down there. They put this thing together. They invited so many people, and they were all going to be put up at this hotel. Mark was going to put up the money and put up the hotel, and we were going to eat and all that stuff. And so we get there, and then we're there Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We get there Friday. There are only 7 or 8 people who actually show up for the whole weekend. And this is, and that's including Burton Richardson on Sunday. He's lucky dog, and he showed up the first thing. But there was Eric and myself, Mark and Arlen, so that was like 4, and then there was Steve Grody, then Mark Sandin, Mark Baloff. That might have been it.
And you're talking about this is the famous like meeting at that park.
That's right.
Wow.
So basically, I got to fight Arlen like a million times, and Eric a million times, and Mark a million times. And the other guys as often as, it's just funny because everybody goes, oh yeah. I said, look, nobody showed, and things, we invited those people, but everybody thought we were nuts. Everybody, and it's not nuts. It's just like, say, look, at a certain point, you make a decision. It's like, and you can't say, well, this it was not that way, and you go, yeah, it was that way. It was, you have to make a decision if that's what you want to do. And so the Eric, at that time, Eric Knaus was wearing batting gloves. He wasn't even wearing we have those gloves that what's it called, the common instrument, have those like street hockey gloves or whatever kind of gloves. That's what they do. Or they have the narrower version of the lacrosse gloves, but they're still protected. They're the idea not to break your fingers and stuff like that. It's just like if you hit Eric, it was basically he wore the batting gloves so he wouldn't skin his knuckles when he was punching the person in the mask. It wasn't to protect his hands, because he figured, and quite honestly so, that if you couldn't move your hands fast enough to get out of the way, well, then you kind of deserve to get them broken.
Yeah, that's a different level of commitment to the art and to testing yourself.
Yeah, well, it's it was it is what it is, but it's it's one of those things where it's actually very funny, because I was at a tournament, or I was at a gathering once a year or so later, and it was at the park right across the street from Mark's house on 4th Avenue in Hermosa Beach. Anyway, so I'm fighting this guy, and it's like it's a knife fight, it's a stick fight, and like I'm feeling kind of off, and then he jumps up and grabs me by the head. So like he sort of has me like a guillotine, and it's I have the fencing mask on, of course, which is holding me everything else. So I like this. So I finally get him off me. I'm so angry at myself, but I mean, like, you can't punch yourself, so you do it to somebody else. And so so I push him off. I pass his guard, and then I was so infuriated, so I stood up and I sort of took this thing above my hand and I drove it into where I thought his chest was. And I did that a couple of times, and it was very funny because Mark put it on his a day at the gathering. There's a videotape that said, like, like, this is what you're going to run into when you're in the gathering, and it's like, this is the first thing, and it's like, and it wasn't like I was planning to be all dramatic, but it was just like, yeah, okay. It was just like one of those things, like because it was just one of those things that you just sort of like, I can't believe I let myself happen, and it's like I could have been killed. Like,
Yeah.
that.
So what was the blowback that you guys started to receive once you guys started doing this stuff and it started to pick up steam and it started to grow? What kind of blowback were you guys getting from the FMA community?
Well, I mean, everybody who has a Filipino background was saying, and they would basically say, Dog Brothers, and some series of expletives would come out, and most of the guys who were serious about it were actually very good. I mean, I'm not going to say that everybody who did it, but there were a lot of guys who did it, who would say stuff about the Dog Brothers. But at the beginning, it was a remarkable laboratory. You could find out, if your stuff worked, it worked. And if it didn't work, well, it was pretty spectacular in that way too. And so these things would, you would get some immediate feedback, and you'd find out whether or not your material was as good as you said it was, or as good as you thought it was. And I mean, I remember fighting a guy, one of our own guys, and it's like I had this technique that I kind of, I won't say I pioneered. It was like I was desperate, and then this is what came out. And so the guy would hit me in the head. I would do the umbrella, and then I would follow through with a strike across the legs. And I got this guy about 2 or 3 times, and he was so pissed at me that he just like, it's like, it was like that, wham boom, and then I was just about to do the third one, and he said, "Fuck you," and basically bang, hit me across the legs, and I was like, oh, I can hardly walk. So it was it was interesting, but I was really fortunate because at that time, one of the other guys that a guy training with me, a guy named Loki Jorgensen, started coming down with me, and he started doing his stuff in the Dog Brothers as well. He was there were a lot of people that were there that were slowly starting to come out, and they were starting to the Canadians were considered, it wasn't that we weren't noted for being polite anymore.
So speaking of which, I mean, there's not many. I mean, how many Dog Brothers are there in Canada? Like
8 or 9, 6 or 8. It's hard to say. I don't want to go and say because I feel bad because I know that there's at least 5 or 6 of them in Vancouver. There's 1, 2, 3. Let's say 4, maybe 4 or 5 in Montreal, and there's 1, 2, 3,
4, maybe 5 in Toronto.
Well, 5, yeah. I mean, for Toronto, yeah, there'll be like 4 or 5, maybe 6. I don't want to say there isn't more. It's just that it's like saying quick, name all the streets you drive by when you're on your way to work.
Well, the reason why I say is because we are the Canadian camp, and I want to know, what do you feel? How do you feel that the talent pool here in Canada is with regards to? I mean, because there's a lot of people within the community, both Gamma, Combat, and many other places. What do you think the pool is for talent?
I think it's very, very deep, but the problem is, like anything else, it's like like the real problem in Canada is that in the States you can do certain things and you can get away with it, and in Canada you have to keep it a little bit further underneath the radar because people aren't as welcoming about new ideas. They are, they want to be able to say, yeah, my stuff works. It's, I was watching a Harold Howard documentary on, and he was talking about how, basically, what he was going to do. He was his lead up to his participation in the UFC way back in the first couple of tournaments, and I remember seeing Hoist Gracie, basically, the skinny little guy. People used to ask, why didn't they put in Hickson Gracie? He said, well, Hickson Gracie looks like a fighter, so if he won, they would go, oh, he's a fighter.
Yeah, wouldn't have the same impact.
Of the whole family, Hoist Gracie was the perfect guy. I mean, first of all, he was young, so he had the endurance. He was skinny as hell, so basically he was wearing. He didn't look very big even in his kimono, and he would wear his kimono, and so they would all come in on that, the Gracie train, and they would come in, and and he'd spend like 2 or 3 minutes, but the most amazing thing, the truly amazing thing to me, is how quickly. I mean, it used to be like this, right? So the Gracies would be up here, and the rest of the world was down here. Within, I don't know, two UFCs was here, was here, and then by the third or fourth UFC, having a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was no guarantee of a win at all, ever. And that just showed me, it just meant that all those guys who were, American wrestlers, American whatever, kickboxers, they learned quickly. You could, it's amazing because the Gracies had won everything in Brazil for years and years and years. And it took the Americans and their training methods to actually come up and say, yeah, okay, here we are. And, that's...
it's one of those events that's forever impacted martial arts, like throughout history.
Yeah, absolutely. It's people say, well, what was the last wave? And, and they mentioned some, martial arts style. And really, I think, it's funny because we were, as the Dog Brothers, we were actually initially invited. There were some, when Art Davies was putting together one of the shows, he was asking us if we would be interested in participating in.
Wow, really?
Yeah, as the Dog Brothers. And ironically, I don't, in retrospect, since we were never there, I can say yes. And Mark told me that he had thought there was going to be 4 guys, and I was going to be one of the 4 guys. And I was like, yeah, thanks very much. He's like, thank God he didn't ask me.
Well, I mean, really, that's what you guys kind of like were that for stick fighting.
Well, it's what's funny is that we would get all these guys who would tell us that, you may be good, but you're not really Filipino martial arts. And, I mean, even in our own Pikiti group, we would, Tuhon would allow things like, they're the dog eaters. And it's like, it didn't take much to understand what dog eaters were. They were the people who would eat the Dog Brothers. It's like, well, not bloody likely. I've met some of those guys. It's all very good, and it's very easy to say. It's like a couple of years ago, we had a group of guys. Actually, they drove all night from Wyoming. I have no idea, and they all came up and said they'd never done this before, and they'd all been studying doing Cali for 6 months or 8 months. And normally, you have to join. You have to register in advance, not because we want to somehow control you, but because just to know who the hell you are.
Exactly, it's smart.
And so so it evolved like that, and so these guys showed up and they said, "Oh, we've never done this before," And one guy, so our guys were, welcoming. "Oh, you're coming here from far away, so welcome." And they tried suckering us, and so by the second round, the guys, the fighters that were there, like if you have somebody who hasn't trained in 6 months, you're not going to just imagine if you're in a boxing gym and you're going to say, okay, you're going to spar, and you're not going to go, like Pernell Whitaker isn't going to go in there with somebody with 6 months training and beat the living crap out of him. What the hell for?
Yeah.
But if he fights, if he fights a guy who's at his level or almost his level or whatever, or at least, maybe you're not as good as you are, but you're just like, but a lot more than with the experience level they said, then you go, well, okay, maybe yes, maybe no, not really. But it's like, but they came in, they all did one fight, and then they left. It was like, okay, I mean, imagine driving 1,000 miles to do that. It seems pretty useless, but everybody has their own life.
So one of the things that when I first started to like, I was privileged enough because of combat. I got to meet Tyler and Renee, and and then the younger generation, Dave and Justin. But I really loved how what made it different for me was it wasn't just about the weapon, right? You're actually fighting, and you just happen to have a weapon in your hand.
Yeah.
How liberating! Like, because when you started doing it, like you said, you had all your credentials, all your previous experience. How much easier was it, given that you had that experience, to pull things off or to, express yourself when it came time?
Well, I think it's a lot easier than you imagine, but you have to kind of break through the resistance to doing that, because a lot of times, you'd be there. I remember I actually did I beat the crap out of cancer thing at combat once, 3 4 years ago, and I was fighting a guy, and I knew I've been told, don't go for his knees. He has bad knees. He just had an operation, but he was in there fighting anyway. So I read this. The first 3 shots I did to him were on his knee. It was like I felt so bad. Sorry, Jeremy. I didn't mean to do that. But then you start realizing that that's what it's all about. Sometimes you just like, it's like, just because it is that way. I mean, there are a couple of times when there was a guy, another at the same, I don't know, the same event, but a similar event. People would show up, and it'd be like, when Tyler and Renee put that together, the idea was to have it sort of like Dog Brothers thing, but not Dog Brothers thing, so they could actually do more than, because of some ideas and restrictions, they would not allow you to do that if it was a Dog Brothers thing. So these guys would say, okay, you have to be like this. You have to, So anyway, there was a guy who was, who had come out of the closet, not closet, but he'd come out of the crowd, or he wanted to do it, and he was fighting one of the guys who had been doing Dog Brothers, but he hadn't quite become a Dog Brother yet. And he was fighting, and then, then he just he was doing cheap shots, like, oh no, don't do it, bang, and you go like, eventually you eventually go, okay, is that how you're going to play? Okay, no problem. I now understand. And so he got the guy on his back, and and he started punching him in the face. And the guy was going, "Hey, what's this all about?" He said, "It's a fight. You just got into a fight. You can't play. Oh, you can't play with that. You can't do that way, because it's a fight. It's like most fights are like, if you're a boxer and you're in a fight, that there's certain things you can't do. You can't kick him in the groin. You can't step on his foot. You can't punch him in the back of the head. But you kind of know what the situation is, because though those things can happen to you, but if you start contravening whatever rules that are getting set up, you can't just say you can't start playing. Oh well, that's not fair. Well, it wasn't fair when you did it either first.
How did the beat the crap out of cancer? How did that come about? How did that start? And what's the difference between that and the gathering?
Okay. A gathering is like, there's a certain thing, you have to register for a gathering. There is the difference is that if you are a Dog Brother, okay, we're actually trying to use the reality of being involved in this stuff to our advantage. And for that, I mean, if you're entering beat the crap out of cancer, it doesn't really matter. There's most of the stuff is the same. Most of the stuff is identical. The difference is that the people, like, for example, if you fight somebody, that will never get counted on, to negative or positive in a Dog Brother event, because it's not a Dog Brother event. So, but it is, it is good. It's, as far as that's concerned, it was originally designed. I mean, Renee's sister was a cancer survivor, and Tyler's father is a cancer survivor. And for those, then they said, okay, so what we want to do is we want to do something because the gathering, we had gatherings in Montreal, but it wasn't like we hadn't really had the very first Dog Brother gathering was held in Toronto because I thought that was the best
That was
best
at
use of space anyway. So, but I remember the very first one was at Combat Arts, and it was, yeah, it was a slightly different, I remember it was a different building, so it was slightly different. And so so we had it where, and there was a room off to one side, and that's where we had it. And so that was the very first one we did. And so after that, because that's what makes me think that we only did that one, because we've only done last year was supposed to be our 10th, and we didn't do it because of the COVID.
yeah.
So I'm thinking to myself, is it, well, I'm not going to say one way or the other because I know Sean's done a lot of he's had some beat the crap out of cancers there, so I don't know for sure. But anyway, I'm just going to put it down to being old. Okay, so anyway, so the difference is that the rule set is sort of the same, but not exactly the same. So that means that there are certain things that you can do in a dog weather event that you couldn't really do that you're obliged to do in that. And for example, like Mark has always, whenever Mark has been the referee, he's always had the right to stop a fight if he feels it's unequal, and or stop a fight if he feels that it's if the person, for example, knife fighting, he gets to say to somebody, okay, you won that fight, as opposed to, even though it's no winners, no losers, it's not so much you won, but more like, I think you're dead now.
Yeah.
So I think there's that. But at Combat over the years, there's been some very, very interesting stuff, and it's just the more organizational part of it. It's I don't want to say it's one thing or the other. It's like, I honestly don't know, because part of me, Arlen has fought at a couple of beat the crap out of cancer. So, and I think that one fight that he did with Renee with the Krabi Kravong swords was amazing. And I remember him hitting Renee on the top of the head, and Renee kind of being a little senseless for a little bit.
Yeah, he told me about that.
He remembered.
That's good. The reason why I ask is because I'm curious, because I've fought at a handful of or a few beat the crap out of cancers, but I've never fought at a gathering, and I'm feeling like maybe it's time. I don't know when that's going to be, but that's why I asked, because there's a process to it, right? You have to do a certain amount of fights at a gathering, be recognized, get dog.
Okay, well, okay, whatever your ranking is within Dog Brothers, it's incidental. There is a thing where you have to do at least 2 or 3 gatherings to be considered for dog, and
Right.
then you have to do another 2 or 3 gatherings to be considered for candidate dog, and then you have to do another 2 or 3 gatherings possibly to be considered for a full dog. So, but full dog brother is like, but it's funny because people say, well, how did you get yours, Philip? And I went, well, I got mine the very first time I showed up. Then people go, I fought about 35 times that weekend. Okay. I fought Eric about half a dozen times. I fought Mark half a dozen times. I fought Arlen half a dozen times. And they were not being nice to me. And I fought them, I was trying to fight, because I tell you, I wasn't trying to be nice to them either. But it's like, people say, well, I did it the first time. I say, yeah, I did that the very first time, but I didn't do it the first time. It wasn't like that was the first time I ever picked up a stick. I've been doing stick fighting, by 1988, I've been doing stick fighting for 7 years. So, I mean, I'm not saying it like there's, because of the years I've been doing it. I say, no, it's not that at all. It's more a matter of I've been doing it for 7 years, so I knew what I was doing. And so when I had to fight Eric, I mean, I'd fought Eric one night. I'd fought him for like 3 hours by myself on a tennis court. So it was just like hour
Three
after hour after
three
hour.
hours.
Yeah,
Jesus Christ.
yeah. I mean, and Eric is like, and it's funny because, but the only thing that I would say that would made up for it was the fact that Eric had not started jujitsu yet. So I actually took him down.
Oh, okay.
Because I mean, when Eric learned, when he became a purple belt in jujitsu, this guy became a monster. Like he just sort of like, he would go do it, and he would get close. He would do this thing because he was training with the Machados. He'd bang, he'd go in, boom, he'd turn you over, do this stuff, and then start raining blows down on you. It was like, it was hell. Yes, it was really hell. But that's what he was good at. He was able to do that kind of stuff. He was, Death from Above was my nickname to him. He was really quite a. It was an amazing situation when you'd see him do his stuff, because he was he would be like, kind of like, like that persona of the accountant I was talking about before.
Yeah.
Like this. Okay, there. What is this? Whack. Like, whoa, what's going on? And you just you realize, there's actually a guy named Ian Wilde who was one of the Dog Brothers, and he said, when the stick whistles by your mask, you have to wonder which of yourselves you're trying to defend. So yeah.
How important is it for FMA practitioners to get some grappling education?
Extremely important. It's like, see, I apologize all you guys in the Philippines, but there in the Philippines, an awful lot of the stuff that we do, because everybody, it's funny because even though we are like the very first people to actually start using fencing headgear in stick fighting and no body armor, because I remember back in '88 when I fought that tournament in Nashville, it was like we had to wear body armor. We had to wear like the Doce Pares hard shell mask, and the sticks we had, they barely were like maybe 5/8, maybe 3/4 of an inch in diameter, probably more like 5/8. I hit one guy once so hard that I hit him the side of the head. I was doing a forehand strike, and I hit him the side of the head, and the thing wrapped all the way around his mask and hit myself in the hand. Okay, and it didn't, and so it was like it was very humid at that time, and so it was like, oh, okay, but I was like, oh my God, this is like, this is ridiculous. And I mean, Guru Dan actually gave me a copy of that stick that I have at my school, and it's a really tiny stick, and that's kind of like, okay, I'd rather not have to deal with that, because you worry about yourself, and and most of the time, the thing about situations where somebody else has the choice. I mean, like there's all no rules, no referees, be friends at the end of the day is really important to me, because I don't want to do something and think to myself, okay, I want to hurt you really badly, but more importantly, if I do hurt you really badly, I would be very, very, very sorry that it happened. But I'm not going to go shoot myself.
No, but I think that's important, that after, and that's the thing that's beautiful to watch, is after you see these guys do this shit to each other, there's that camaraderie afterwards. Right away, there's that handshake, there's that acknowledgement, and you guys are there for a reason, and everybody knows why they're there. It's no mystery, and you move on.
Yeah, exactly.
So that being said, what impact do you hope to leave in the martial arts community?
Well, when it comes to, I've been sitting down for so long, my legs are starting to spaz out.
No, we'll wrap it up.
I'm not worried about that. I'm just explaining why I have to look like I'm going, my right thigh starts spazzing out. Anyway, when you start doing something, you don't really do it. If you want to do something for real, you don't do it for like, I want to leave this mark in the world. Like if you start doing that, I mean, I've met people like that, and it's like politicians who get arrested for corruption. They're the ones who do stuff like that. Like I want to be, or that. I remember that guy. I don't know if it was the politician who we saw at Christmas time, who got dressed up in his suit, and while he was down in the South, and wanted to say, like, oh yes, you have to stay in line. You have to.
Oh,
stay
yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's like those are the kind of guys I don't want to be associated with that. I don't want to be that person that does that kind of stuff or tries to do it. But if there's a thing that I want to do, I want to make sure that everybody has access to the same information. I mean, in Pikiti, I've learned that there's a whole lot of technique, and you can learn it or not, but there's a lot of technique, and there's an awful lot of principles, and you have to understand what those principles are, because no matter what that technique is, it compresses itself inside of you and then somehow comes out. It's not, there's nothing you can do. You can't say, well, I'm never going to do that technique. So, well, you have no idea, because there may be some time that using it is really, really smart thing to do. And you may not say that, oh, this is so stupid, I can't imagine. So you have to be a little bit more honest with yourself about how to do that kind of stuff. But when it comes to that, but when it comes down to it, you have to say to yourself, okay, when I'm doing, like, I see guys who have not had that much experience, and we all go like, oh yeah, okay. And it's, I think to myself, it would be nice to be able to say, we have the curriculum, because we're in the process now of putting together the basics for a PTK Canada thing. And so, and that part of that thing is the curriculum, because we want to be able to get people, and not, they don't have to suck up to some guy who is controlling who they are. It's like, look, if you're good enough, you should be able to learn it. It doesn't matter. Like right now we have 5, let's say there's single stick, double stick, stick and knife, there's spadadega, knife to knife, and empty hand. But there's also malayo sibat, which is a long staff. And there's also different other aspects. There's lukot, which is like it's kind of like a karambit type of thing from the Philippines. And but there's 1,000 weapons that you can use. There's like, there's different things that you could possibly do. You can have like the krabi krabong, the thing that looks like a tonfa. I can't even remember what it's called.
Moisak.
Yeah, Moisak. So so the tonfa, and then you have a sword, and there's a billion things. And to say that, the thing is, we're starting to know more technical stuff about all systems, and it's like, if but you want to be able to create a community of people where it's not a big secret. I mean, the big thing before, like maybe 100 years ago, it was really important to keep this information secret and hidden. And I'm not saying that you're going to make books and put it on the internet, but you need to be able to make your stuff available to people, because that's how things die.
Yeah.
If you, I mean, when I remember, when I started training with Guru Inasato back in 1990, it was interesting, because you'd see the stuff and you'd see the material that would be there, and you'd see the stuff and you'd say, oh, okay. And you'd hear people say, well, that, they never learned this, never learned that. And say, well, how on earth do you know? Like they had like maybe 10 people in their school, none of whom, 2 or 3 of whom were interested in publicizing what they did there. Most of the people basically saying, nothing. And then, the 1 or 2 people that would say something would say, well, it's not fair because, this happened and that happened. And you go, yeah, okay. But when it comes down to it, I think curriculum is the thing, because if you actually leave something that somebody can do, I mean, like if we were talking about, what do I want to do? Well, I want to do that. I want to be able to leave a legacy, so that not for me, but for people in Canada, so that they can say, okay, yeah, this is the whole system, at least there. And so once you have that information, then you can say, like, for example, like nobody goes into a university and said, okay, I know everything there is to know about engineering. I know everything there is to know about physics. because physics and engineering, they're growing skill sets. And what's it called, FMA is no different from that. It's a growing skill set. People will be able to learn stuff much better if they know that it's that the even if they've learned everything there is that they're expected to contribute.
Do you think do you think the same applies to Jeet Kune Do?
Yeah, because I don't think that I think like everybody likes to talk about Jeet Kune Do as if like Bruce Lee was this guy and he did this thing and said, look, I'll use the analogy of Jimi Hendrix. I mean, I love listening to his version of Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtower. It just goes to show you exactly how completely different it is. And I remember when I first started listening to Jimi Hendrix, I was in high school, and it was like, what the hell is this guy doing? And it's only in the meantime that I've actually learned enough about his music to be appreciative of it. Because sometimes, like if you think that the Monkees are really great, well, you're probably not going to be too impressed by Jimi Hendrix, because the Monkees, they all sing in tune and they all do this stuff, and it's not cacophonic, and it's not stuff, it's not chords played backwards, it's not stuff running this way and that way. So you just start realizing that you also have to be prepared to know whatever there is to know. So when it comes to stuff like JKD, it's like, yeah, I think people start saying, it's what's funny is that when people start taking a lot of information and they start saying, well, this is something that's existed all this time. We had everything. He said, look, everybody had everything, yeah, sort of. But when I read stories about people in the years ago, it's kind of funny because years ago, I guess when I first started in the 80s and 90s, all the intelligentsia of the Philippines were saying that there was no such thing as Filipino martial arts. And nowadays, the people who trained them, or who are there, are going, they're not saying that. They're now saying that's not Filipino martial arts. This is Filipino martial arts, and not that. And you go, well, based on what? I mean, you have a bunch of people who are there. Like there's some core techniques in Filipino martial arts. I think that every university would be able to, should have their own department of that. But I mean, that's just because I'm biased, right? But I don't see them. I don't see that the art I don't see for example, I don't see like, so this art should have this information and everybody else shouldn't have it. It's like, well, look, if how can I say this? I stole it fair and square. Well, same thing.
Yeah.
Like when Bruce Lee was, Bruce Lee learned boxing from his brother, for God's sakes. His brother was a boxer, and, Bruce Lee was a Wing Chun guy, and he was a cha-cha-cha dancer, and he, and, he practiced some Tai Chi, and he practiced some stuff, and, the stuff that he did that he considered important in 1958 probably wasn't the same stuff that he considered important in 1964. And and in 1967, when he was doing the other stuff, and it probably refined itself even more. And but most of the guys, when you like, before most of the other guys who passed away, they were all trying to develop, they were all trying to defend their position, and their positions were probably all valid. But it's just like, but you have to do more than just say, oh yeah. You have to be able to provide, if I say that bridge is no good and here's why it's no good, and then you go, oh yeah, well, that doesn't say anything.
Yeah.
That's like, okay, so how do you say, when if somebody says that something's no good, you have to basically take that same argument and go, okay, this is how I think you are wrong.
Here's my point.
Here's my point. Here are the points, and you have to be able to, unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there who don't take that kind of route. But it's like, we are in situations nowadays where we have tons and tons of people who use, well, that's just BS. So, well, based on what? Please, illuminate me. I don't disagree with you that it's not BS, but I want to know what it is. Why is it BS? Why is it BS? Is it BS because you think so, or because it confuses you, because it's like it doesn't go along with your particular set of criteria? Well, we think this group of people is wrong. Why? Because we don't like what they look like.
Yeah.
Well, okay, you know,
I personally think, I mean, and you can attest to this more than anybody, but I think that what Guru Dan has done for Jeet Kune Do and what he's done and ran with it, I think he's pushed it further than it would have then if somebody just stuck to what Bruce was doing, at the
well,
beginning.
I think what Bruce Lee was doing at the end was, I mean, had he survived, I think you would see a completely different JKD now.
Oh, 100%.
But see what happens. I think what happened. See, he became an icon. When he made that movie, he made the movies. He was becoming an actor more than a martial artist. He wanted to make that kind of synthesis between the two. But then he passed away, and he didn't even see the opening of Enter the Dragon. It was,
No.
and I remember watching The Big Boss the first time, and you hear stories about him saying, "I don't believe that," because he was really upset by the the jumping up in trees, the stuff that actually they started redoing in what's it called,
Cinema.
there's Chinese cinema. There's that movie that came out, they were all running the.
Well, they had it in Crouching Tiger
Right.
and Dragon. They had it in Kill Bill. That wire kung fu type of thing.
Exactly, but there's a fairly recent movie, Chinese movie, where they had that same type of thing where they kind of jumped up into a tree and then the tree leaves kind of carried them along, and you're going like, what is this? Yeah, so Hidden Dragon, or hidden. I keep screwing it up because it's because to me it's very funny, like a garden chicken dragon, whatever. Anyway, so but
That's a t-shirt.
but I think very much so that Bruce Lee stuff would, I think he would have accepted, welcomed MMA, and evolved, because it was the first true version of how the material would actually work. And the best part of it, for me, the best part isn't the fact that the Gracies could no longer do it. It was the fact that the Gracies introduced this new thing, this beautiful thing that took all these parts and put it together, and then
Boom.
Matt Hughes beat the crap out of Horace Gracie, the founder of this stuff.
Yeah, with
So it's like it's not like that he beat him, that there was a reason. It's the fact that the person could learn it so well that it was that the teacher was it wasn't like the teacher was so imperative to its application.
it was the art, not the art.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I'm gonna wrap it up with this question.
Okay.
So many years of experience. What shortcuts, what nuggets can you give somebody in the martial arts right now who's younger? What advice could you give them that you think could save them a lot of grief?
I guess the thing it would be doing is like don't listen to people when they say no, because invariably the no is them reflecting their own insecurities and not what you're expecting to do. But I would say, do the most you can get, or do the best style that you can find, and apply that. Don't worry about all the other aspects of it. You're the most style, like learn boxing, learn wrestling, learn judo, because it's a great art in that. The wrestling is works, but it's not perfect. It's got its own thing. It doesn't wear uniform. It doesn't wear clothes. It's based on guys who used to grapple with each other without clothes on, so there wasn't any clothes to grab. So, but nowadays, if you're if I'm a fighter, I have to be able to deal with the fact that you can choke me with your clothes, you can throw me with your clothes, you can do all sorts of stuff if you have clothes. So you don't want to be that person who has to take their clothes off to fight. And so, but wrestling is great. There's could be that there's a weapon component that if you're going to do real MMA, maybe you want to do weapon component. Then you have to say to yourself, okay, is this a firearm based component, or is this whatever? if you want to be today's modern warrior, you have to go to where those guys are doing it. No matter what you are, no matter who you are, it's like if you don't do that kind of stuff, it's pretty hard to be the best thing you can be, because everybody's out there. Like I see stuff. This stuff is you shouldn't have to do this. There's a guy who I watch a lot of YouTube stuff, and there's a little skill set. I remember watching an advertisement for the Aston Martin SUV today, and I'm like, wow, that costing 4 cents to make that. And but there's a lot of times where guys will go on there and say, yeah, but it's running is not going to make you lose weight. Said, it's like it's this this special cream from this or whatever you like, and it's like, no, it's like, and you go, okay, I mean that's real that's real fake news. It's like, okay, that's not true. It's like to say that things won't work or they aren't going to work. It's like you have to prove it. You have to, you can't just sort of say, well, I don't believe this. It has to work. It's like, okay, but we got to do more.
Well, thank you so much, Tuhon, for doing this. I appreciate your time and your wisdom. Well, thank you so much, Tuhon, for doing this. I appreciate your time and your wisdom. I mean, you're just one of those guys. You're a pioneer. You set the example, and I appreciate your work and your leadership. And you're a great person. Every time I've met you, I've always lived with a smile, and I always learn a lot. I appreciate everything you do.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I will try not to say anything negative to that, because no matter how much I disagree with it, but it's okay.
Hey, man.
I appreciate the kind words. Thank you very much.
Everybody, check out Tuhon Gamma Martial Arts in Montreal. Martialarts.com is the website. Hopefully, when this COVID shit takes a rest, I definitely recommend making a trip there and learning from this gentleman. Thank you so much again. Thank you for being on the Parley, and hopefully we can do this again in the future.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.
Thumbs up. All right.